Alright guys, welcome to the third and final video in the desert biology series. In this video we're going to take a look at plant adaptations, okay? So let's have a look. So here is a map showing the different types of vegetation environments in Australia. You can see there that Australia is very diverse in the wide array of vegetation that we have. The majority of it, as we looked at last time, is kind of your arid, semi-arid, tussock, kind of grassland and shrubland area in the central regions, but it has a few other things as well. Yeah. So you'll notice that unlike other places, Australia is very characterized by these kind of really tough, dry, kind of textured vegetation. So spinifex is a really good example. Mulga trees, the leaves are kind of really dry and they're almost kind of dead, but they're not. But that's not the only thing that Australia has, right? As you kind of go further towards the coast, you notice that we have grasslands, and then we also have tropical rainforest towards the northern side, and then temperate rainforest along the eastern coast and down towards Perth and Hobart and so forth. Okay, so we do have a wide variety of different types of vegetation. But as you go further inland, you notice that it kind of turns into kind of this arid vegetation. Okay. Now, for us to understand how plants survive in the desert, we need to understand the process of photosynthesis. How do plants get their energy, get their food, and then also what are some of the ways that they are able to do this effectively in the desert environment? Okay, so I'm going to teach you guys the process of photosynthesis, and more particularly how the plant does this exchange with its environment in the desert. So photosynthesis is the chemical process of using sunlight to produce organic compounds, glucose, from inorganic substances such as carbon dioxide and water. Okay, now it has a chemical reaction, right? Formula. And so this 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of H2O water with the energy from sunlight is producing 1 molecule of glucose and 6 molecules of oxygen, oxygen being the byproduct and the waste product, right? If we were to divide the chemical reaction in half, and you'll learn more about this as you do the chemistry unit in the next unit, right? That you'll see that on the left side of this arrow here is the reactants. This is what the plant needs to put into the leaf. And on the right side are the products. And this is what the plant produces as a result of the raw ingredients. And then it releases back into the environment. Okay. Now, of the different components, carbon dioxide is obtained from the air around the plant, particularly the air around the leaf, because the leaf is the photosynthetic organ in the plant. The water is obtained from the soil, and so the roots of the plant will draw water from the soil and bring it up to the leaf through the stem and the branches, and then it goes into the leaf where it gets used up as part of photosynthesis, with any excess amount being released. Okay, now pay attention to those two parts because they're both at this stage the raw ingredients that the plant needs to survive. The plant will need sunlight as to photosynthesize, and when it is produced, when the glucose is produced, it is then used by the plant for energy to build its cells. Okay, now you can't see it because it's cut off down the bottom there, right? But the glucose is the fundamental building block that the plant then uses to build its cells. Okay, so that's used by the plant for energy. And then oxygen is actually a byproduct. The plant will use some of it for its own respiration of cells, and then any excess amount will actually get released into the air around it, allowing the plant to obviously provide oxygen to other organisms in that environment. Okay. Now, the process of photosynthesis and respiration are linked. You and I can only undergo respiration, okay? Whereas plants can do both, yeah? So the plants can photosynthesize, and animals and organisms, all organisms actually, will undergo a process of cellular respiration. Now, cellular respiration is the chemical reaction of producing or releasing that energy from glucose back into carbon dioxide and water. So if you were to think about the two chemical reaction, right? Photosynthesis is moving this way. It takes carbon dioxide and water using solar energy put into the plant to produce glucose and oxygen. Cellular respiration is the reverse process. And so it uses oxygen and glucose, which is why we need to breathe oxygen, and we need to eat glucose. And what it does is it releases that energy as chemical energy to be used by the body, and then as a result, we breathe out the carbon dioxide. This is a waste product, and we have metabolic water. Yeah, so your body actually produces water from the food you eat in order to survive. Yeah, and some of that water is used in metabolism and, you know, providing a medium for your cells to survive. And then the excess carbon dioxide gets released back into the air whenever you breathe out. And so the two processes are inextricably linked. Animals will use cellular respiration. Plants will use both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Yeah. And so that's the kind of, you know, this kind of endless cycle of taking raw ingredients, turning it into organic compounds, complex organic compounds, and then taking those, breaking it down back into the raw ingredients by animals. Okay. Now, how do plants therefore adapt in the desert? Yeah. Remember that the plant needs to take in carbon dioxide, take in water, and receive sunlight, right? And so when it comes to the challenges that plants face in the desert, right, they are in an environment where they are going to lose water really rapidly because it's dry and the water will evaporate really quickly. There's very little water available, so they have a low water uptake, and there's heat stress that the plant will experience. On the other hand, the positives for plants in the desert is that photosynthesis will not be a problem because the sunlight is so strong and intense in this environment that photosynthesis will not be an issue. Okay, so water will be the main issue that the plant experiences. And so they need to be able to adapt by maximizing the amount of water they're going to take from the environment, minimize the amount that they're going to lose through the leaf, reduce the amount of heat exposure that they have, and then make sure that their seeds are also drought resistant. And so those are the different adaptations that we're going to go through in this video. Okay. Now, maximizing water uptake. Yeah. So desert plants have in general, plants that need to maximize their water uptake, right? They have these long, unbranched, deep roots that allows them to bury deep into the soil, right? And these roots are called tapper roots, right? And so the roots, what they do is rather than just kind of spreading out across, what they do is they dig very deep into the ground, almost the height of the trees sometimes. And then when they hit the water, they then spread outwards, and that allows them to then dig for water deep under the ground, because even in the desert, sometimes you'll find the water very, very deep underground. Okay. Minimizing water loss is a very significant aspect of desert plant adaptations, and so plants need to be able to adapt to reduce the amount of water that they lose to the environment. Remember that the plant will take water from the ground, bring it to the leaf, and so the water that is used by the leaf for photosynthesis will be used up, but any excess amount of water that the plant brings up from the soil will be lost to the environment. So plants need to slow that process down by having a few different adaptations. One of which is by having a thick cuticle. Yeah, the cuticle is this layer of waxy coating that covers the leaf. It's what gives those green, strong leaves that kind of waxy feeling on the surface. And what it does is it forms a barrier that prevents water from evaporating through the cells and outside of the leaf. So you can imagine the water coming in through these these transport vessels here, and then it might get evaporated through this leaf. But desert plants will need to have a thicker waxy cuticle that allows it to trap more of that water in, preventing it from being lost. Okay. Now, to understand the how plants minimize water loss, you need to understand the function of one of the structures called the stomata. Now, the stomata is the opening of the leaf, right? So if you were to take a look at a cross section of the leaf, this is what you will find, right? If you were to cut the leaf kind of straight down the middle, you're going to see that the vein that runs along the middle of that leaf, that little vein that you sort of see branch out along the leaf, right? That is called a transport vessel. And from there, right, that the leaf needs to release water from the transport vessel into the surrounding cells, right? And then that water gets used up for photosynthesis along these cells here. and then it's released. Any excess amount of water will be released through the stomata, and the stomata is this little opening here of the leaf, right? And then that opening there, that is what allows water and any byproduct of oxygen to be released from the leaf, and it also takes in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, right? So that little regulatory opening that opens and closes regulates how much of the plant can photosynthesize. Okay, carbon dioxide goes in, H2O and oxygen will go out, right? And this is what it looks like there. It looks like these little coffee beans, right, with a little slit that allows it to be open or closes. Now, this performs a really important function in the leaf, right? Whenever the guard cells on either side of the stomata open, it opens up the opening, the stoma, or the hole that allows the movement of these gases. That gas exchange process, that means that the photosynthesis process is running. If the guard cells close the stomata, then what will happen is photosynthesis will slow down or even stop, preventing any carbon dioxide to go into the plant and preventing any water and oxygen from leaving the plant. And so the plant can regulate how much it's photosynthesizing based on the opening and closing of the stomata. Now, some of you guys might be asking, well, if plants can regulate that, why don't they just kind of, shut it every time it gets too dry, and then open it whenever it gets kind of moist? The trade-off that the plant needs to kind of figure out is that if you close the stomata, what you're doing is you're not photosynthesizing, and if the plant is not photosynthesizing, it's not producing enough food for survival and for growth. However, if it opens too much, then too much water gets lost in the process, because not all of the water gets used up, and some of that water gets lost through the stomata, regardless of how efficient the plant is. Some of that water gets lost, and so the plant needs to kind of create this balance of making sure that the stomata is open enough for it to grow and survive, but not too much that it loses too much water. Okay. So there's a few ways that the plants can get around this. One of the ways is to actually have what we call a sunken stomata. So rather than having the opening right at the surface of the leaf, what it does is there's a little groove, and the stomata sits at the bottom of the groove, creating this kind of micro environment, preventing too much air from escaping because of the wind, and too much moisture being drawn out of the leaf because of the wind. It slows down the photosynthesis process, but what it does do is it keeps the air just within that little sunken region. It keeps the air trapped in this location, and it protects it from the wind and the outside environment, right? And so desert plants will have a sunken stomata, creating that kind of microhabitat that's suitable for humid air to stay within this region, okay? They can reduce heat exposure so that you can kind of prevent damage to the leaf by changing the leaf's color. So for example, some desert plants will have silver or glossy leaves, which will then reflect more sunlight. Other plants will actually have narrow or kind of spiny leaves to reduce the amount of surface area so that it doesn't absorb as much heat. And also it won't lose as much water because there's less stomata there as well. And then also one of the things you will notice about Australian plants, and particularly eucalyptus plants, is that the orientation of leaves actually sits vertically. And there's a very good reason for that. So eucalyptus leaves dangle vertically, because by dangling vertically, what it does is that during the early morning and the late afternoon, that vertical leaf will be in direct facing of sunlight, and that allows it to photosynthesize in the morning and the evenings. But during the midday, when the sun is straight on top of the leaf, that the rays are going to cut straight through the leaf, reducing the amount of intensity that the leaf experiences, so that eucalyptus leaves are photosynthesizing in the early mornings and the late afternoons, but not during the midday when the sun is directly over the plant, and that heat stress could be too much for the plant to survive, okay? And then finally, desert plants often have drought-resistant seeds that are adapted especially for when water availability is only there for a couple of weeks of the year. Yeah, so these plants are what we call ephemeral plants. Ephemeral meaning that it only lasts for a short period of time. And so these ephemeral plants will germinate from seed, they will flower, and they will produce new seeds within this 2 to 3 week cycle, much like the drought-resistant seeds of the brine shrimp, right? But they're just the plant equivalent, right? So the seeds contain water-soluble molecules that prevent it from germinating, and then when it rains, the molecules get washed away, and the seed will then start to germinate and begin its life cycle, which is why, usually in the desert you see grasses and things like that. They're kind of barren, they're brown for most of the year, and then all of a sudden you get this kind of bucketing of rain that happens like a monsoon for only a couple of weeks of the year. And then during that time, the plants need to kind of capitalize on that rain, and they need to develop, flower, germinate, and the whole life cycle within those couple of weeks. Okay, so hopefully they can then survive for the next season when the desert environment resumes again. Okay. All right, that's it for the plant adaptations. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll catch you guys later. All right.